Sit down and read through almost any of Paul's letters, and you'll notice that he talks a lot about the law, by which he means the law of the Old Testament. And he often speaks of it in such disparaging terms that you would be forgiven for thinking that he rejects the law. But he doesn't. Paul has a paradoxical understanding of law that you really have to grasp in order to understand Paul's message. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Thursday, August 1st, 2024. In the fourth of H. Richard Niebuhr's Types of Christian Understanding of the Relationship Between Christ and Culture, he lifts up Paul as an early example of this type, which he calls Christ and Culture in Paradox. And nowhere is the nature of paradoxical thinking more on display than in Paul's discussion of law and grace in the letter to the Romans. Remember that Paul was a Jew through and through. He goes to great pains to remind his readers that he had been a thoroughly faithful practicing Jew, even to the extent that before his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, he was actually a persecutor of the church. In fact, he was on his way to Damascus to hunt down and arrest Christians when he had his conversion experience. So if there is anyone who understood the importance of the law, it was Paul. For several chapters in Romans, Paul explains to his readers how it is that the law actually encourages sin. For example, in Romans 3 he says, "For no human being will be justified in his sight by deeds prescribed by the law, for through law comes the knowledge of sin." But just when he has his readers thoroughly convinced of the uselessness of the law, he turns around and paradoxically says the opposite. He writes, "What then should we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, 'You shall not covet.' But sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died, and the very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and just and good. Did what is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin working death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure." This is typical of the way Paul develops his whole theology. He insists that the law is good, and yet through the law we are paradoxically led into sin. While he doesn't explain it as well in Romans, his point is that attempting to present oneself as righteous before God by following the law, we essentially nullify the grace of God in Jesus Christ. For Paul, one can be justified either by law or by grace, but not by both. So if I try to demonstrate my righteousness by adhering to a set of rules, I am in effect declaring my independence from God. I'm saying I do not need God's grace. And this is the very definition of idolatry. I am placing myself above God, and in my spiritual pride, I deny my need for God's grace. And yet for Paul, the law is good. For one thing, it shows us what sin is, and it restrains us from doing evil. More than that, the law points us towards the good. As Calvin rightly proclaimed, the law is actually our teacher. But the very minute we think we are righteous because we follow the law, we fall into sin once again. So in a very real sense, the law is both an instrument of grace and a tool for sin, and therein lies the paradox. Tomorrow, another paradox. How can we live in two kingdoms at the same time? But for now, May God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.